Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves stumbling quite literally into the misty folds of a forgotten corner of medieval France. You're walking down a dirt path, your boots sticking in the mud, the scent of damp hay tickling your nose, and the only sound around you is the soft clinking of a distant cowbell, or is that a goat? The moon hangs low, and somewhere, a villager snores against the backdrop of chirping crickets. You're not in a bustling city of knights and chivalry tonight. No sir, you're in a tiny village where nothing much happens. That is, until a goat gets rested. Yeah, a goat. Rested, you might think, surely. You can sleep through this sleepy tale. But brace yourself, because this little French village once found itself embroiled in a courtroom drama that would make even modern lawyers scratch their heads or nod off, depending on how much wine they've had. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your location and what time you're listening to this. I love seeing where and when you're snoozing. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the village of Autun, nestled in the folds of Burgundy. It's the 15th century, and the streets are lined with crooked, thatched roof houses that lean like they've had too much mulled wine. The villagers, wrapped in itchy wool and suspicion, eye you from behind cracked shutters. Here, the line between sacred and silly is as blurry as your candlelit reflection in a puddle. On market days, goats meander freely between stalls, their hooves clacking on cobblestone, nibbling at anything from cabbage to parchment. To modern ears, the idea of such freedom sounds charming, but to these villagers, goats are more than livestock. They are mischievous tricksters with ties to dark forces. Or at least, that's what the priest says during sermons that last a bit too long. You overhear whispers about the goat asterisk, that asterisk goat. They say it committed an unspeakable act, but in typical medieval understatement, no one dares name the deed out loud. Instead, they cross themselves and mutter that justice will come. And in this place, justice doesn't sleep. It yawns, yes, but it never sleeps. Historians still argue whether the villagers' fixation on this goat was driven more by local superstition or a need to scapegoat pun fully intended the creeping dread of plague, famine, and taxes. When people are scared, they tend to see monsters in the barnyard. You duck into the dimly lit tavern, where the air smells like old ale, wet fur, and a faint hint of garlic. A weary bard strums a lute in the corner, playing the same tune he's been playing since Tuesday. You take a seat beside an old man who claims to have seen the goat's misdeed. He tells you, over a plate of suspiciously chewy stew, that the goat looked him right in the eye asterisk, and did what no creature should do in polite society. What did it do? You ask, half afraid, half bored. He leans close. His breath smells like onions left too long in the sun. It blasphemed, he whispers. You blink. Blasphemed. He nods gravely, as though the goat itself had cursed the villagers' crops by chewing the wrong shrub. Of course, you might be wondering, could a goat really blaspheme? Or is this just one of those cases where humanity projects its guilt onto animals because facing our own messy flaws is a bit too much before bedtime? Scholars have poked at this question for centuries, often while sipping their third glass of Bordeaux. But the villagers, oh, they don't need scholars. They've already decided, and they've already called the court into session. The town square is a sleepy affair. Wooden benches creak under the weight of gossiping villagers, and the smell of goat droppings mixes with the scent of overripe apples from the market stalls. At the center, a rickety platform hosts the makeshift courtroom. And yes, the defendant has arrived. Tied to a post, the goat stands quietly, its eyes glassy, its beard twitching in the breeze. It looks, to your modern mind, like any other goat. But to the villagers, It is the vessel of cosmic insult, a four-legged affront to heaven itself. Remember, this is a time when the boundaries of law, faith, and folklore are as tangled as the knots in a monk's robe. The court treats the case with solemn seriousness, and, frankly, you can't help but admire their dedication to due process even if the accused can't speak. In the crowd, someone shouts that the goat must be given a fair hearing. Another insists it must be excommunicated first. You can't help but chuckle. Even here, justice gets bogged down in procedural debates that would make a modern courtroom clerk weep into their paperwork. And just like that, the sleepy villagers' quiet days are gone. The trial is on, and you've got a front row seat. You settle into your spot on the creaky wooden bench, feeling the uneven planks poke at your back like the universe's way of reminding you that justice, much like medieval furniture, is not built for comfort. Round you, villagers lean in, their faces aglow from flickering torches, eager for the spectacle to begin. They whisper, speculate, and occasionally pass a flask of something strong enough to make the goat's alleged sin seem almost reasonable. At the center of the square stands the goat. It remains stoic, chewing lazily on what might be straw, or might be the remains of the village ordinances. It's hard to tell in this light. The beast stares ahead, oblivious to the weight of ecclesiastical doom resting on its fuzzy shoulders. And then, the crime is finally named. In a voice so somber it nearly puts you to sleep, the village scribe reads the charges aloud. The goat is accused of violating the sacred sanctity of the village chapel. Details are whispered, but never fully spelled out. You catch hints of chewed hymnals, upturned candlesticks, and something involving the baptismal font that the priest refuses to describe without blushing. Now, you might think, surely this is where someone in authority steps in, pats the goat on its tiny head, and tells the villagers to go home. But no, this is 15th century France. Here, rules apply to all beings four-legged, winged, or otherwise. Historians still argue whether these animal trials were more about symbolic theater or genuine belief in animal culpability. Either way, this goat is about to face the full machinery of justice, creaky gears and all. You hear the church bells toll, though it's unclear whether they're signaling the trial's start or just reminding the tavern to stop pouring ale. The magistrate appears on the rickety platform, his robes looking a tad too short for his round belly, his wig askew in the damp night air. You can't help but notice he carries a strong resemblance to the cheese merchant, and you briefly wonder if they're the same man working side hustles. He clears his throat with theatrical gravity. The villagers hush. Even the goat pauses its chewing, perhaps intrigued by the noise. Let this court commence the examination of the accused, the magistrate drones. You shift on your seat. The pace is slow, almost comically so. It's like watching molasses slide uphill in January. But that's part of the charm, isn't it? The gentle absurdity of a society so convinced of its own righteousness that it drags a goat into court and treats the matter with more care than it does human marriages. You glance at the scribe, who's dutifully scribbling every word into the record book. Scholars will later puzzle over these entries, scratching their heads over the exact definition of bleating in defiance. One curious tidbit emerges from this process: the villagers are known for embellishing records, adding flourishes to make even the dullest trials sparkle like candlelight. As the prosecutor stands, a hush falls over the crowd. He paces the platform, dramatically pointing at the goat. You half expect him to start quoting scripture. And, wouldn't you know it, he does. Passages from Leviticus, warnings of beasts that lead men astray. He reads them all with the solemnity of a man convinced the world hinges on this case. And here's where the first real giggle bubbles up from your throat. Because while the prosecutor paints the goat as an agent of Satan himself, the animal proceeds to relieve itself right there on the platform. The villagers gasp. The judge frowns, and you start to suspect the goat might be the only one here with a sense of comedic timing. Still, the trial continues. Witnesses shuffle forward. Their testimony is blending fact, folklore, and something dangerously close to bedtime stories. One swears the goat spoke to her in a dream. Another insists it danced a jig on the altar steps. Historians still debate whether these accounts were meant as genuine testimony or just the villagers' way of livening up a long winter night. Through it all, the goat stands impassive, unapologetic, or perhaps just bored. The magistrate, cheeks flushed from the effort of staying awake, demands the defense speak. And here's where things get truly bizarre. Because yes, the goat has a lawyer. You can't make this up. Well, actually, you could, but medieval France beat you to it. The defense attorney, a man with more flair than sense, steps forward, arms flapping like a rooster who's had one too many. He argues that the goat, as a creature of God, lacks the moral agency to commit such crimes. He quotes Aristotle, much to the villagers' confusion, and at one point attempts to summon character witnesses. Naturally, none arrive. And yet, despite the lawyer's theatrics, the villagers seem restless. You overhear one mutter, "Too much talk, not enough action." You can't help but agree. Justice here is a performance, yes, but even the audience has its limits. As the torches sputter and the moon slips behind clouds, the trial crawls on. The goat remains the picture of calm amidst the frenzy of human absurdity. You stifle a yawn, feeling the gentle lull of the court's droning voices, the crackle of torches, the smell of damp earth mixing with sleepy superstition. You're beginning to think the goat has already won by boring its accusers into submission. But no, the trial is far from over, and as the magistrate prepares to deliberate on the verdict, the villagers lean in once more, their hunger for justice reignited like a candle's last flicker. The magistrate leans back on his rickety chair, well, more of a throne if you ask him, though to your eyes it's little more than a glorified stool with wobbly legs. He adjusts his hat, which by now has surrendered to the night's dampness, looking less like an emblem of authority and more like something salvaged from the town's lost and found. His face, illuminated by torchlight, reveals a weariness that suggests this is not the first goat to have troubled his docket. You can almost hear his internal monologue. I went to law school for this. Except, of course, there are no law schools here, just a tradition of muddling through and pretending it's all by the book. You blink slowly, fighting off the delicious weight of sleep creeping over your shoulders. The court is still in session. Technically, though at this pace, they might still be arguing whether the goat qualifies for last rites come sunrise. The magistrate now calls upon the town priest, a man whose sermons are notorious for their length, their labyrinthine metaphors, and their inexplicable detours into cheese production. You brace yourself. The priest, with a sigh that sounds rehearsed, begins to outline the spiritual consequences of the goat's actions. He references no fewer than 7 obscure saints, most of whom you suspect never actually existed, and ties their stories somehow to this goat. One saint, according to him, once exorcised a demon from a particularly ill-tempered donkey. Another saint had visions of goats leading sinners astray across a Paris, metaphorical bridge that sounds suspiciously like the one outside town known for its loose planks. Historians still argue whether these sermons served any real purpose, or whether they were simply medieval bedtime stories with extra guilt laid on top. Either way, the villagers nod solemnly, as if every word is gospel, while you struggle not to drift off. And yet, amid the absurdity, there's something oddly poignant here. The villagers, frightened by the unknown, use rituals like this to make sense of their world. The goat is not just a goat. It is fear itself, a stand-in for hunger, plague, and the creeping dread of their own fragile mortality. You stifle a sigh. Maybe the goat knows this. Maybe it doesn't. But you can't deny it makes for oddly soothing courtroom drama. The priest concludes by recommending the goat's excommunication, a statement met with murmurs of agreement. You're pretty sure the goat isn't Catholic, but that doesn't seem to bother anyone. Next, the village constable who doubles as the baker, because in these parts multitasking is less about ambition and more about survival, steps forward to describe the scene of the alleged crime. He paints it with exaggerated flair. The toppled candles, the scattered hymnals, the goat standing atop the pulpit like some woolly antichrist. Of course, you weren't there. You can't confirm any of this, but judging by the theatrical way he waves his arms and the way he stumbles over his words, you're inclined to believe at least half of it is pure invention. Perhaps this is his moment to spice up an otherwise dull winter. And let's face it, one must hasn't, at some point, embellished a story to make ourselves the hero, or, in this case, the brave baker constable who confronted the bleating menace. Through the haze of candle smoke and sleepy chatter, the trial inches forward. The defense lawyer rises again, exasperated, delivering an impassioned plea on the goat's behalf. He accuses the villagers of scapegoating the poor beast, a joke that does precisely 0 laughs. You think it's funny, but no one else seems to have your sense of humor. He goes on to remind the court that animal trials are not unheard of across Europe. In fact, he boasts, they've tried pigs, dogs, even insects. You imagine tiny bees in tiny handcuffs and chuckle softly to yourself. Yes, history is stranger and funnier than fiction. One curious fact bubbles up from the defense's rambling speech. There are records of cockroaches being exiled from churches in Italy. Scholars have written entire volumes about this odd chapter of jurisprudence, debating whether the trials were symbolic rituals or merely desperate acts of frustrated clergy. Historians still puzzle over the line between theater and belief. And tonight, as the goat blinks lazily in the torchlight, you wonder if it even matters. The magistrate rubs his temples, clearly regretting his life choices. He mumbles something about needing more evidence, more witnesses, more cheese, possibly all three. You see the glint of desperation in his eyes. The trial, meant to soothe the town's fears, is dragging on longer than a January sermon. And the crowd, once rapt, is now restless, shifting in their seats, muttering about the cold creeping into their bones. You, however, find yourself lulled by the rhythm of it all, the droning voices, the crackling torches, the soft shuffle of goats in the distance. It's like a bedtime story written by bureaucrats. Just as your eyelids begin to droop, a final witness steps forward, a small boy clutching a wooden toy goat. He stands on tiptoes, his voice trembling, as he claims the goat visited him in a dream, promising to behave if forgiven. The crowd gasps. The defense jumps on it, arguing that even in dreams, repentance must count for something. The prosecutor, unimpressed, rolls his eyes so hard you fear they might pop out and land in the goat's water bucket. And the goat, well, the goat yawns. As the villagers debate the implications of dream testimony, you can't help but feel a soft smile spread across your face. There's something oddly comforting in their attempts to navigate justice, however absurd. They're just people, after all. People trying to make sense of a world that doesn't always make sense. You lean back against the wooden bench, your body sinking deeper into the warm haze of sleepiness as the trial lumbers on into the night. You're not sure if the creaking in your ears is from the weary benches or from your own bones settling into the drowsy rhythm of this never-ending trial. Either way, you shift, letting your gaze drift once more to the goat, who now seems to be enjoying the attention, or maybe just enjoying being awake while half the village dozes off mid-prosecution. The magistrate, ever the fan of legal theatrics, stands, wobbles slightly on the uneven planks, and declares that due process demands consultation with the ecclesiastical court in the neighboring Paris. This announcement is met with groans from the villagers, most of whom had hoped for a swift conclusion and perhaps an excuse to get back to their warm hearths and suspiciously overcooked turnip stew. Still, justice must be served, or at least simmered over several nights, like a particularly fuzzy pot of broth. And so, you find yourself trudging alongside the caravan of townsfolk, their torches flickering like tired fireflies as they march toward the larger church in the nearby town of Dijon. Yes, that Dijon, the one that will someday be famous for mustard, but at this point in history is best known for its gloomy cathedrals and priests with a fondness for lengthy lectures. As you wander through the night, you catch snippets of villagers debating the goat's fate. Some claim it's an omen, others mutter that it's the devil in disguise. A few, the more practical ones, whisper that perhaps the goat simply likes the acoustics of the church and that's why it returns there. You nod sleepily at this theory. It makes as much sense as anything else you've heard tonight. You pass a group of elders huddled by a dying fire, sharing tales of other animal trials from their youth. One, with a laugh like dry leaves, recalls the infamous pig of Soissons, which was once tried and sentenced for eating a baker's child. A grim tale, softened only by the knowledge that the pig's sentencing included a lavish, if bizarre, public apology. Historians still squabble over whether these spectacles were public catharsis or simply entertainment during dark, hungry times. You suspect it was both. Arriving at the larger town, you're greeted by the scent of incense and the stern gaze of the diocesan court. The priests here are sharper, their Latin more polished, their tolerance for goat-related hijinks significantly lower. And yet, to your astonishment, they agree to hear the case. Inside the cavernous stone church, the goat is led to the front, where it stands beneath stained glass windows depicting saints, sinners, and, ironically, flocks of sheep. You can't help but admire the goat's calm. It stands amid the grandeur, surrounded by robed clerics and villagers whose expressions range from curiosity to outright sleepiness, and does what goats do best: choose. The bishop presiding over this higher court is a man of ample girth, with a voice that could put an owl to sleep mid-flight. He speaks at length about the necessity of maintaining divine order and the importance of punishing any creature that threatens the sacred fabric of society. You hear murmurs of approval from the villagers, but you also catch a few suppressed yawns. This is where the defense lawyer, ever the optimist, pulls his boldest move yet. He argues that the goat is innocent because it has not been proven that the act was intentional. He draws on the works of theologians who argue that animals, lacking immortal souls, cannot truly sin. His speech includes references to Aquinas, Augustine, and, bizarrely, a German farmer who once wrote about the innocence of cows. You're fairly certain the bishop isn't impressed, but he allows the argument nonetheless. During a break, you stroll through the cathedral's courtyard, listening to gossip about other notorious trials. You hear of rats summoned to court in Autun for eating grain and bees put on trial for stinging a monk during mass. You chuckle softly. If justice here were truly blind, it might trip over its own ridiculousness. One villager, perhaps emboldened by too much cider, tells you about the trial of a swarm of locusts in Provence. The insects, represented by a public defender, yes, really, were ordered to leave the fields within 3 days or face divine punishment. Unsurprisingly, the locusts didn't comply. Historians still debate whether such trials were legal farces, theatrical coping mechanisms, or a reflection of humanity's need to feel in control over forces that remain stubbornly uncontrollable. As the night deepens, the court reconvenes. The bishop allows the villagers to present final pleas. A farmer speaks of lost crops. A widow speaks of the goat's menacing glare. A child, clutching the wooden lamb, tearfully begs for the goat to be forgiven. arguing that perhaps it was lonely and seeking comfort in the chapel. You feel a sudden tenderness toward the boy's logic. It's a gentle reminder that beneath the layers of ritual, fear, and bureaucracy, these are just people trying to impose order on a world that often refuses to make sense. The bishop listens, nodding gravely, though you suspect he's already decided. And, after much pomp and prayer, he announces that the goat shall face excommunication, followed by execution on the grounds of public scandal and the need to restore order. The villagers gasp, cheer, and, bizarrely, some weep. The defense lawyer protests, quoting, "You guess, probably another obscure philosopher no one remembers. But it's too late. The verdict has been passed, and as the bells toll once more, you settle into your seat, letting the absurdity of it all wash over you like the softest lullaby of medieval nonsense. You wake, or perhaps you never quite drifted off, to the hollow echo of bells signaling the goat's sentence has been finalized. The villagers file out of the cathedral into the soft pre-dawn glow, their breath fogging the chilly air, their footsteps heavy with both satisfaction and something like relief. Justice, in its odd, woolly form, has been served. You shuffle along with them, feeling like a reluctant juror who overslept through half the testimony and still found yourself complicit in the verdict. The goat, tethered to a post in the square, seems oblivious to the town's theatrical closure of the case. Or perhaps, in its own goatish way, it knows it's become more than an animal. It's now part of a fable that will be retold round fires for generations. Back in the village, preparations begin for the sentence's fulfillment. The executioner, who also moonlights as the village carpenter, remember, multitasking is key in medieval townships, sharpens his axe while humming a lullaby. You overhear two older women argue over whether it's bad luck to eat goat meat after an excommunication. They agree, with a sigh, that perhaps it's safer to make a stew for the pigs instead. The town's priest organizes a prayer vigil, complete with incense, chanted psalms, and a rather heavy-handed sermon about the dangers of pride even in goats. His message meanders, as usual, into metaphors about rotting cheese and crooked fence posts. You'd roll your eyes if your eyelids weren't already too heavy. Through all this, the goat remains the epitome of serenity. It scratches its ear against the post, munches the few stray daisies, and gazes at the villagers with an expression that could either be resignation or supreme indifference. Historians still debate whether animals like this goat were viewed as vessels of sin, as mere symbols, or, perhaps more practically, as convenient scapegoats again, pun intended for the villagers' collective anxieties. One quirky account from a traveling friar tells of a town in Flanders where a pig was dressed in human clothing before its execution, as a way of publicly humiliating the beast. The villagers here, thankfully or perhaps disappointingly, forego such theatrics. There's no tiny wig or goat-sized tunic, just a solemn air, the steady crackle of torches, and the faint, sleep-inducing drone of the village choir rehearsing a hymn to notes off key. The magistrate, clearly worn thin by the ordeal, oversees the preparations with the enthusiasm of a man whose dinner is getting cold. You catch him eyeing the goat with a mix of irritation and hunger, and you briefly wonder whether the post-execution feast will feature a suspiciously familiar stew. You wander toward the edge of the square, where a few skeptical villagers whisper doubts about the whole affair. What if the goat was innocent? One murmurs, sipping weak ale from a cracked mug. Another shrugs. Does it matter? Justice is about making people feel better, not always about being right. That, you muse, is perhaps the truest thing you've heard all night. The execution is, to put it bluntly, anticlimactic. The villagers gather, yawning, as the sentence is read aloud with pomp that no one has the energy to fake anymore. The goat, tied to the post, flicks its tail as if swatting at flies of injustice. The axe falls. The deed is done. You think there might be applause, but instead, The crowd mostly disperses, muttering about the cold, the lateness of the hour, and the prospect of missing breakfast. You linger, watching as the priest leads a fumbling procession of penitents, the villagers trudging behind, holding candles that sputter in the breeze, their chants blending into a sleepy hum. There's something eerily soothing about it all. The cycle of crime, trial, and punishment, no matter how absurd, provides a comfort to these people. It creates a sense of order in a world that, to them, is a chaotic storm of bad harvests, mysterious illnesses, and taxes from nobles who never bother to visit. You sit on a hay bale at the edge of the square, letting the soft rhythm of their chants lull you deeper into a half-dream. The night has stretched so long that your sense of time has blurred like ink on wet parchment. In this moment, the goat is no longer just a goat. It is a story, a bedtime fable, a vessel for fear and forgiveness, and the peculiar rituals that sleepy humans invent to feel safe in a world they can't quite understand. And as the villagers return to their homes, their torches flickering out one by one, the town falls into a hush so deep you can almost hear the stars sighing overhead. You're left sitting in the empty square, the scent of hay, candle wax, and sleepy just as heavy in the air. The magistrate wanders past, loosening his collar, muttering about his sore feet and whether the town should consider switching to something more modern like fines or, heaven forbid, community service. You chuckle softly. Community service for goats. Now that would be a story. As your eyes drift shut once more, you wonder what other creatures across Europe are standing trial tonight under the sleepy gaze of courts determined to impose their rules on the unruly rhythms of night. You, pigs, locusts, rats, each facing their own peculiar verdicts, their fates recorded by scribes who might just be making half of it up as they go along. And as the village sleeps, you let yourself float into that same cozy absurdity, the gentle hum of human folly wrapped round you like a thick woolen blanket. By morning, the village has already begun rewriting the goat's tale in the way only sleepy villagers do, adding flourishes, omitting awkward details, and ensuring that everyone who was anyone had a front row seat. Even if they actually spend most of the trial in the tavern, you stroll through the market square where merchants, shaking off the last traces of ceremony, hawk their wares as if the trial never happened. There's a kind of collective shrug hanging in the air, a weary exhale that says, well, that's over. What's next? You can't help but appreciate the villagers' ability to slide back into the comforts of routine. Like slipping into a well-worn cloak, the goat's remains are gone, whisked away to a pasture beyond the village where, presumably, they will return to the soil, feeding crops, feeding goats, feeding more stories. You overhear the butcher and the baker exchanging theories on whether the spirit of the goat will linger and if next spring's lambs will have a rebellious streak. Someone laughs, someone crosses themselves, someone sells goat cheese with a wink. But the ritual's echoes still linger in the corners of town, in the half-hushed gossip behind haystacks, in the sermons that will surely reference the incident for months to come, and, perhaps most charmingly, in the children's New Street rhyme about the goat who stood trial for chewing the chapel pew. Historians still argue whether these moments of animal trials reflected legal seriousness or, in fact, ritualistic ways for communities to confront their own fears through the soft theater of the absurd. Some suggest the trials were performative politics, symbolic cleansing of societal wrongs, projected onto animals to maintain a fragile human unity. Others claim it was merely the law going through the motions, a sleepy bureaucratic exercise designed to show that no crime, no matter how goatish, escaped the watchful eye of the court. You lean toward the first theory, if only because you prefer your history with a dash of theater and a pinch of cheese-fueled paranoia. As you stroll toward the village tavern, you catch snippets of new tales already brewing. They say the goat's spirit visited the priest in a dream, nibbling at the edges of his sermon notes. Another story claims the goat cursed the crops, though when you glance at the fields, They look exactly as pitiful as they did before. You chuckle softly. This is how legends are born, isn't it? A drizzle of truth, a spoonful of fear, and a heaping ladle of sleepy imagination. Inside the tavern, the townsfolk gather for breakfast, their conversations pivoting to more urgent matters: taxes, the coming harvest, whether the blacksmith's daughter is courting the miller's son. You sip regale alongside them, the events of the past night already fading into the cozy haze of shared history. The village scribe, a man with ink-stained fingers and a penchant for hyperbole, is busy updating the court records. You peek over his shoulder, reading his florid prose. The goat is now described as monstrous in demeanor and possessed of eyes that glowed with infernal light. You cough to stifle a laugh, remembering the bored, sleepy creature you saw barely batting an eye at its own sentencing. Still, you admire the scribe's flair. Every good story needs embellishment, and, in a way, the goat deserves to be remembered as something larger than life. It's the least they can do after hauling it through the bureaucratic pageantry of medieval justice. Outside, a group of children stage their own mock trial, using a chicken as the defendant. The charges, pecking at a sacred loaf of bread. The jury, a mix of giggling friends and one disinterested pig. You smile. Even at their youngest, humans can't resist the pull of courtroom drama, especially the absurd kind. As the day drifts on, the town returns fully to its sleepy rhythm, but you can't help but feel that the goat's trial has left something behind. Not just in the dusty pages of the court records, but in the villagers themselves. They walk with a little more certainty now, as if having performed the ritual of justice, no matter how ridiculous, has eased a collective itch they couldn't quite scratch before. And maybe, in a world where wolves prowl the edges of the woods and plagues creep unseen into villages, a trial like this is necessary. A story, no matter how absurd, is still a comfort. It tells people that they can face the wild unknown and emerge with a verdict, a sentence, a conclusion. Even if the defendant is a goat, you wander back toward the chapel, now cleaned and blessed. The overturned candlesticks righted, the hymnal pages replaced with new parchment that will, no doubt, one day be chewed by someone or something again. In the quiet pews, you sit, listening to the breeze whisper through the cracks in the stained glass. You imagine the goat standing where you sit now, its hooves clacking on the cold stone, perhaps wondering why these humans bother with all their rituals, their robes, their words. And you decide the goat probably had the right idea all along. Just chew the straw, enjoy the sun, and let the humans fuss as they will. You close your eyes, letting the warmth of the chapel embrace you, letting the absurdity of the world outside fade into a gentle lull. The bells toll again, not for the goat this time, but for the noon prayer. Still, their sleepy clang rolls over you like a soft lullaby, urging you deeper into drowsy reverie. You stir from your bench, blinking lazily at the streaks of sunlight filtering through the chapel windows, catching specks of dust as they float like little reminders of time drifting by. The town is quiet now, the kind of hush that settles in after a storm of drama, be it a bad harvest, a wedding scandal, or, apparently, the trial of a goat. You meander through the village, the streets once again ruled by sleepy chickens and children playing games that always end in someone being declared the judge. There's a peculiar comfort in how swiftly the extraordinary folds back into the ordinary. Like the goat trial was nothing more than a hiccup in the town's long, slow exhale. The magistrate now returned to his other duties, which include sorting disputes over garden fences and who owns which chicken, sits at his usual post near the market. His robe is gone, replaced by a faded tunic, but he still manages to look vaguely annoyed at everything round him. You overhear him grumble to the scribe about the paperwork the goat trial generated. 3 scrolls, to witness statements, and a formal letter to the bishop's office, all for a goat. You almost sympathize. Almost. Historians still argue whether these kinds of animal trials, particularly the goats, were actually taken seriously by the populace, or whether they functioned more as a sleepy kind of civic theater or for communities to assert order over chaos through pageantry rather than actual punishment. Some claim that the villagers believed in the trials wholeheartedly, fearing the spiritual contamination that came from unchecked animal misbehavior. Others suggest that, much like you, they rolled their eyes but went along with it anyway because, well, tradition. You lean toward the latter. You can't quite shake the feeling that even in the midst of the solemn chanting and hand-wringing, the villagers were, deep down, indulging in the theater of it all. After all, a world that puts goats on trial is a world that finds comfort in absurdity, and isn't that what stories are for? You pause at the well where the blacksmith and the tanner trade tales of other animal trials. The blacksmith claims to have witnessed a trial of caterpillars in Switzerland. They were accused of devouring the town's cabbage crop and sentenced to exile. You can't help but picture a line of caterpillars trudging sadly across the Alps, tiny bundles on their backs. It's absurd, yes, but also oddly charming. Further down the road, you meet a traveling friar who tells you of a locust trial in Milan. The town elders had the insects read the charges 3 times. The friar chuckles at his own story, confessing that the locusts, naturally, refused to attend court and continue their feast. Perhaps, he muses, they were the smarter creatures. You sip watered ale as the friar continues, telling you how some towns held mass exorcisms for swarms of mice, how pigs were hung from public gallows, and how, in rare cases, townspeople tried to bribe the animal spirit into leaving by offering tiny cakes or sweetened milk. You chuckle into your drink. Medieval justice truly had a sweet tooth. The friar lowers his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, telling you that some whispered of a secret tradition, clandestine trials where animals were found not guilty. These events, he claims, were never written down, hidden away like shameful confessions. Whether these trials were acts of mercy or a way for skeptical judges to quietly undermine the system, historians still debate. You find yourself quite liking this version of the story. The idea of a sleepy courtroom where a goat or a pig or a particularly surly rooster is given clemency tickles the corners of your imagination. Back in the square, a group of town elders gather at the inn, where they indulge in what might be your favorite aspect of these trials, the endless retelling. Already, the goat's trial has gained layers. The goat spoke Latin. The goat danced on 2 legs. The goat gave the priest a disapproving side-eye that made the man drop his sermon mid-sentence. None of these things happened, but they make the story tastier, like extra honey drizzled on stale bread. You can't help but notice how each retelling grows sleepier, softer, until the goat becomes less of a criminal and more of a tragic figure, a misunderstood beast caught in the petty squabbles of man. It's the kind of story that lulls you into a gentle, ironic comfort. And as the sun begins to dip below the horizon once more, painting the fields in sleepy gold, you recline on a hay bale, letting the chatter drift over you like a warm blanket. The goat, they say now, was a prophet in disguise. Or perhaps the devil. Or perhaps just a goat who liked the acoustics of the chapel. You let all the versions swirl in your head like a warm broth of nonsense. After all, does it really matter which is true? You find your eyes drooping, your thoughts softening, your breath slowing to match the lazy rhythm of the village settling into its familiar hum. The trial may be over, but its echoes will lull the town and you for many nights to come. And somewhere in the distance, you swear you hear a faint bleat. Or maybe that's just your imagination. Either way, it's oddly comforting. The village fades deeper into its routines, and as the nights grow longer, The tale of the goat trial becomes woven into the fabric of the town's sleepy folklore. You wander through the market days later, watching as merchants sell hand-carved wooden goats to travelers. Their exaggerated horns and comically stern expressions now a charming symbol of the villagers' proud, if not entirely rational, commitment to justice. You overhear the village storyteller, a woman with a voice like soft honey and a penchant for embroidered facts, spin the trial into a cautionary tale for the children gathered at her feet. She warns them that if they disobey the rules, they might end up like the goat dragged before a judge and sentenced to eternal boredom. The children giggle, eyes wide, as she adds in details of the goat's supposed last words, spoken in perfect French, naturally. You lounge nearby, soaking in the cozy absurdity of it all. The villagers, it seems, have found a way to turn the whole affair into a kind of communal lullaby, a sleepy soccer rattled by firelight, best accompanied by warm cider and the gentle creak of rocking chairs. Historians still debate whether these tales were used primarily to frighten children into obedience or to provide adults a sleepy escape into whimsy. You suspect it's a bit of both. Humans, after all, love to use stories as both shield and sword, whether they involve kings, saints, or goats. One quirky tidbit floats into your ear from a passing traveler who claims to have visited a town where roosters were once put on trial for crowing at the wrong hour, disturbing a particularly grumpy nobleman's sleep. The traveler insists the rooster defended itself valiantly, though no one can quite agree on how. Some say it crowed in protest. Others say it laid an egg. You are not sure which is more absurd, but you decide it doesn't matter. Both versions lull you deeper into the soft, nonsensical embrace of medieval justice. You stroll past the chapel once more, now decorated with fresh flowers and perhaps just a dash of superstition, as if the villagers want to appease any lingering goat spirits who might still haunt the pews. The priest, perhaps feeling the sting of having been upstaged by a farm animal, has taken to doubling the length of his sermons, inserting long-winded passages about obedience, divine order, and, oddly, proper care of livestock. The villagers endure these sermons with a patience only the perpetually sleepy can muster, their minds drifting to the goat, to the stew they left simmering at home, to the endless comfort of familiar rituals. One afternoon, you wander into the town's modest library, really just a dusty room filled with scrolls, ledgers, and the occasional squished moth. There, the scribe is still hard at work embellishing the goat's official court record. He's added flourishes you don't recall witnessing, the goat glowing under moonlight, the magistrate bravely facing the beast alone, and, most fantastically, the goat's confession delivered in perfect Latin verse. You lean in, squinting at the parchment, and ask the scribe if any of this actually happened. He shrugs, dipping his quill lazily into the inkwell. Who's to say what's true? He mumbles, better to make the story worth reading. And isn't that the heart of it all? The villagers need not just for justice, but for a story that helps them sleep at night. A story that transforms the messy, often cruel world outside their gates into a cozy bedtime tale where goats stand trial, justice prevails, and no one ever really has to face the scarier truth that sometimes things just happen without rhyme or reason. That night, the villagers gather again, not for another trial, but for the annual harvest feast. The goat's tale, naturally, takes center stage. The baker bakes goat-shaped loaves. The children act out the trial with exaggerated bleats and dramatic collapses. Even the magistrate, cheeks flushed from too much cider, chuckles along, lifting his cup to the noble defendant. You watch it all unfold, feeling the soft weight of belonging settle over your shoulders like a woolen shawl. This is the real purpose of the trial. You realize, not justice, not law, but this the gentle warmth of shared absurdity, the sleepy comfort of a story everyone knows by heart, the way laughter bubbles up from the deepest fears and makes them bearable. And as the feast winds down, as villagers tuck themselves into their hay-filled beds. As the last torch flickers out, you find yourself drifting into the same dreamy rhythm. The trial of the goat, like all good tales, has worked its magic, tucking away the villagers' fears under a blanket of sleepy laughter and cozy nonsense. You smile into the darkness, letting the faint echoes of the villagers' sleepy songs drift over you like a lullaby from a time long past. And somewhere, perhaps only in your imagination, you swear you hear a goat's soft bleat floating on the night wind, as if it, too, is bidding you good night. Morning brings another sleepy dawn, the village bathed in gentle mist that clings to the fields like a shy visitor overstaying its welcome. You stroll lazily through the dewy grass, savoring the muffled sounds of a town that, despite its best efforts, never really wakes up with much enthusiasm. The goat's story lingers in the air, a soft undercurrent to every conversation, every church bell, every clatter of wooden cartwheels. You hear it in the blacksmith's boastful embellishment at the forge that he once locked eyes with the goat and saw the devil himself peering back. You hear it in the priest's drawn-out sermons, which now feature entire sections dedicated to the dangers of goats in general. You even hear it in the tavern songs, where the goat is now immortalized as both villain and folk hero in equal measure. And you, ever the sleepy observer, drift along in this cozy current of tales, letting yourself be pulled deeper into the villagers' peculiar rituals of storytelling soothing lullaby. One afternoon, as you sip a mug of weak cider beneath the old oak at the town's edge, the visiting merchant joins you. He listens to the tale of the goat with raised eyebrows and soft chuckles. Then, with a wink, he shares a story of his own, a tale from a town in Germany where a cat was once put on trial for witchcraft. The villagers there, he claims, were so terrified of the creature's green eyes that they burned it at the stake, only to be plagued by mice for years afterward. You nod sleepily. Another animal trial, another quaint chapter in humanity's endless struggle to make the unknowable knowable through ceremonies, rituals, and, of course, the occasional public trial. Historians still argue whether these trials reflect deep-seated fears of the supernatural or if they were simply elaborate distractions from the daily grind of medieval drudgery. You lean toward distraction. After all, if you're busy condemning a goat for cosmic crimes, you have less time to worry about taxes, plagues, or the price of cabbage. You meander into the square where the scribe, ever the village's poet laureate of nonsense, now sells hand-illustrated scrolls depicting the trial. He's drawn the goat in regal robes, hooves shackled, staring down an exaggeratedly rotund magistrate. The scrolls sell well. Visitors lap up the tale like warm broth on a cold night. The goat has become the village's sleepy mascot, a symbol of their peculiar kind of justice, meandering, soft round the edges, and served best with a wink and a yawn. You overhear the miller tell a passing traveler that the goat's trial has elevated the town's status, attracting visitors curious to witness such whimsical justice. The traveler, amused, asks whether the town will be putting any more animals on trial soon. The miller laughs, only if the pigs start preaching. But as you wander past the fields, a few of the older villagers speak in hushed tones, their voices heavy with that old fear, that old superstition. They say the goat's spirit still lingers, that its bleat can be heard on foggy nights when the wind bends through the hollow chapel windows. One farmer swears that his crops have grown crooked since the goat's execution, while another insists that the goats in his herd have begun standing oddly still at sunset, as if awaiting some cosmic verdict. You smile to yourself, warned by their quiet fears, their need to weave the goat's ghost into the tapestry of their daily lives. It's all part of the ritual, the bedtime story that helps them sleep soundly in a world full of things that defy explanation. In truth, the goat never really belonged in their courtroom, but it belongs here now in their legends, their lullabies, their softly whispered jokes exchanged over cider and bread. The goat has done what all the best stories do, it's woven itself into the village's heartbeat, becoming both shield against fear and an anchor in the drifting sea of human uncertainty. That evening, you join the villagers for a harvest bonfire, the flickering flames casting sleepy shadows that dance like silent jurors across the faces of children and elders alike. Someone begins to tell the goat's story again, but this time it's different. The goat isn't a villain, it's a clever trickster, or maybe it was sent by God, or maybe it was just a lonely creature, looking for warmth in a cold chapel. Each version is softer than the last, each twist more forgiving, more gentle. And as the stars bloom overhead, you let the story settle over you like the warmest blanket, knowing that in this village, at least, justice is not about harsh verdicts or grim punishments. It's about stories that help you laugh at your fears, stories that lull you into sleep with their cozy absurdity. And somewhere in the hush between the crackle of the fire and the gentle crooning of old songs, you think you hear it again, that soft, sleepy bleat. Or maybe it's just the wind. Either way, you let it carry you deeper into that delicious, drowsy space where justice wears a fuzzy face and the world, for all its weirdness, feels just a little bit softer. The days roll on like a slow, drowsy wheel, and you find yourself settling deeper into the rhythms of the village, where the goat's tale is now as common and comforting as the smell of baking bread. You overhear the baker hum a lullaby inspired by the trial as he kneads dough, while the town's children scrawl goat-shaped doodles in the dirt outside the chapel. The magistrate, for his part, seems relieved to have moved on to more mundane disputes. He now presides over cases involving fence lines, stolen apples, and the particularly heated argument about whether the village well belongs to the eastern or western side of the square. You smile as you watch him deliver sleepy rulings, his once grandiose speeches reduced to yawning declarations and mumbled threats of fines paid in eggs. Yet even as life resumes its ordinary crawl, the goat's trial clings like mist to the village's edges. Every creak of a chapel pew, every gust of wind through the empty square, carries whispers of the trial. You overhear debates about whether the goat's ghost might still be wandering the fields, judging the villagers in silence. Some claim they've seen its shadow in the moonlight, watching them from the hill where the old gallows once stood. Historians still argue whether these lingering tales are a reflection of lingering guilt or simply the villagers' way of keeping their own fears at bay by giving them a familiar, woolly face. You suspect it's the latter. After all, a ghost goat is far less terrifying than the real wolves that prowl the nearby woods or the tax collector rumored to be making his rounds in the spring. One peculiar tradition emerges from the ashes of the trial. On the anniversary of the goat's sentencing, the villagers gather in the square, dressed in their finest robes, to perform what they now call the dance of the defendant. It's a sleepy sort of parade, with children wearing goat masks, villagers singing sleepy hymns written with goat-inspired lyrics, and the magistrate reluctantly donning his moth-eaten robes to preside over a mockery trial in which the goat is, inevitably, found innocent. You find the ritual oddly charming, if a touch ridiculous. But isn't that the point? These sleepy ceremonies soothe the villagers, anchoring them to something predictable, something they can control. It's a soft rebellion against the chaos of their unpredictable world. You sit beside the storyteller as she weaves new versions of the goat's legend into her nightly tales. Now, the goat is no longer just a mischievous sinner, but a wise creature who tried to teach the villagers a lesson about humility, patience, or perhaps just the importance of keeping chapel doors closed. The moral changes depending on her mood, but the effect is always the same: a soft chuckle, a sleepy sigh, and the gentle lowering of eyelids among her listeners. One evening, a scholar passing through town stumbles upon the story and declares it an important cultural artifact, worthy of study and preservation. He scribbles furiously in his leather-bound notebook, asking endless questions about the legal precedents of animal trials, the theological justifications, the societal implications. The villagers, bemused, answer with elaborate embellishments, feeding the scholar the most outrageous versions of the story they can muster. You watch the scholar scribble on, unaware or perhaps uncaring that he's being fed bedtime stories, not legal depositions. And, honestly, you hope his manuscript becomes the next great text on medieval justice. After all, who's to say what's fact and what's folklore, when both serve to lull a restless mind into comfort? One quirky tidbit emerges from the scholar's notes. He references the rumored trial of a swarm of ants in southern France, accused of trespassing on sacred ground. The trial ended, reportedly, with the ants being granted safe passage to an abandoned field outside the village. Historians still debate whether this case truly occurred, but you like the idea of a courtroom granting clemency to a caravan of ants. It fits neatly into the cozy absurdity of the world you find yourself wrapped in. The villagers now speak of the goat's trial with a kind of sleepy pride, as if the absurdity of it all is a badge of honor. They've transformed what was once an embarrassing chapter of local history into a warm, shared joke, a story they can retell whenever the days feel too long, the nights too cold. And you find yourself part of it now, a participant in the sleepy rituals, a witness to the absurd theater of sleepy justice, a lover of the soft comfort that comes from wrapping your fears in layers of gentle humor and cozy tales. You settle into your favorite spot by the fire in the tavern, letting the goat's tale drift over you once more, familiar now, like an old lullaby that never quite loses its magic. And as the night deepens, the villagers hum the trial's closing hymn, their voices blending with the soft crackle of the hearth, the bleating of distant goats, and the soothing hush of a world where, at least for tonight, justice is sleepy, soft. You wake the next day to find the village embracing yet another sleepy tradition spawned from the goat's peculiar legacy, Goat Day. Officially, it's just an excuse to extend the harvest festival by a few days. But unofficially, it's become a beloved, gently ridiculous celebration where the entire village leans fully into the cozy absurdity that now defines them. You wander into the square where the preparations are already underway. Stalls are decked with goat-shaped pastries, children parade with little wooden goats on sticks, and the blacksmith has constructed a mechanical goat that, when wound up, performs a wobbly jig. You can't help but chuckle as the villagers cheer for the clanking contraption, declaring it the honorary mayor for the day. Historians still debate whether festivals like this emerged naturally from a need to commemorate justice, or if they were, as some scholars argue, elaborate forms of community therapy, where villagers exercised their fears by transforming them into laughable, approachable rituals. You suspect the answer, like most things in life, is sleepily nestled somewhere in the middle. As you drift through the square, you notice how the goat's tale has evolved yet again. Now, the goat is seen as a martyr, a misunderstood hero, a beast who tried to warn the village of their own folly. Some villagers wear medallions with the goat's likeness. Others wear woolen hats with tiny horns sewn in, a tongue-in-cheek nod to their sleepy mascot. You stop by the village scribe, now selling updated editions of the goat's trial scrolls. The latest version includes new dialogue where the goat, mid-trial, delivers a rousing speech about justice, mercy, and the importance of well-aged cheese. You raise an eyebrow. The scribe shrugs, keeps the tourists happy. He mumbles, sipping from his mug of cider. At the chapel, the priest, perhaps feeling outshined by the festivities, offers a sleepy sermon about humility and forgiveness, drawing tenuous parallels between the goat's trial and the trials we all face in life. It's a sermon that meanders into digressions about proper goat care, the dangers of over-salted stew, and why he suspects the blacksmith is hiding extra cider barrels behind the forge. You smile to yourself. The villagers listen patiently, their minds already drifting to the Goat Day feast waiting for them in the square. The highlight of the festival, you discover, is the retelling of the trial by the town's children, who gleefully exaggerate every detail. In their version, the goat wears a golden crown, speaks in rhymes, and turns the magistrate into a pumpkin. The crowd roars with laughter, the magistrate himself chuckling along, cheeks flushed with cider and sleepy pride. One peculiar event caps the night's festivities, a symbolic cleansing of the chapel, where villagers gently sweep the aisles with bundles of herbs, singing lullabies instead of hymns, as if to invite any lingering goat spirits to rest easy. Some even place offerings of sweetened hay and tiny cakes at the altar. Historians still argue whether these rituals were superstitious gestures or simply playful acknowledgments of the absurdity that the town has come to embrace. You're inclined to see them as both an acknowledgement that sometimes the best way to soothe old fears is to turn them into sleepy, shared jokes. Later, by the warmth of the bonfire, you overhear travelers from distant villages marveling at the goat's tale, debating whether it's true or just a tall tale. The villagers smile knowingly but offer no straight answers. In a way, the truth doesn't matter anymore. The tale has become a cozy comfort, a story that belongs to the village now, nestled into their traditions like a cat curling into a sunbeam. You let the sleepy sounds of Goat Day wash over you, the soft clink of mucks, the crackle of the fire, the sleepy lull of the storyteller's voice as she spins yet another version of the goat's fate. In this latest retelling, the goat escapes its sentence by winning a dance contest against the magistrate. You laugh softly, letting the gentle absurdity pull you deeper into the dreamy haze of the night. Because, in the end, it's not about whether the goat was guilty. It's about the way the story soothes the villagers, giving them a cozy narrative they can carry with them into the long, cold nights. And you find yourself carrying it too, like a soft woolen blanket draped over your shoulders, wrapping you in the sleepy, soothing comfort of a story that refuses to be serious and, in doing so, becomes the perfect bedtime fable. As the stars bloom overhead and the last embers of the bonfire flicker out, you drift into a gentle sleep, the goat's tail cradling you like the softest lullaby. By the time autumn's chill deepens into the lazy gray of winter, the goat's tail has firmly rooted itself into every sleepy corner of the village's culture. You see its hoofprints everywhere. Not literally, of course, though some villagers claim otherwise, but in the stories, songs, and quiet jokes shared over steaming bowls of stew. The goat is now more than folklore. It's a symbol, a cozy inside joke, an anchor for the villagers when the nights stretch long and the winds howl through the crooked streets. You stroll through the market, where the winter stalls now sell goat-shaped cookies, their faces painted with sleepy smiles and dreamy eyes. The villagers bite into them with a reverence usually reserved for holy days, chuckling as crumbs sprinkle down their woolen cloaks. The blacksmith, never one to miss a chance to join the fun, has fashioned little tin goat charms which hang from belts, doorways, and even church pews. They clink softly in the wind like tiny, metallic lullabies. You overhear him boast that the charms ward off bad dreams and taxes. Whether this is true or just another sleepy invention, no one seems to care. Historians still puzzle over how such tales evolve, how they shift from courtroom drama to community bedtime story. But you stopped puzzling. You know now that the villagers don't need the story to be historically accurate, they need it to be theirs, wrapped in the wool of comfort and repetition. One particularly sleepy evening, you find yourself wandering the edges of the woods, where a few bold villagers had begun carving tiny shrines to the goat along the old trail to the abandoned gallows. They leave offerings, bundles of herbs, little goat figurines, bowls of sweet milk. Some whisper prayers to the goat spirit, asking for good dreams, gentle winters, and fewer sermons from the priest. You pause at one of these shrines, letting your fingers brush the smooth, worn wood of a carved goat's face. You chuckle softly to yourself. In this sleepy village, even a goat can become a saint if the story is cozy enough. And maybe that's the point. In a world full of harshness, the villagers have found a soft, silly refuge in the tale of the goat. It's a place where justice isn't cruel but gently meandering, where trials end not in horror but in sleepy laughter and warm cider. At the tavern, the townsfolk gather for what they now call the goat's even night of storytelling, soft music and communal napping by the hearth. The storyteller, ever creative, spins a new chapter in the goat saga. One where the goat sails off on a ship made of cheese, seeking distant lands where animals rule courts and humans are the defendants. The children giggle, the elders nod along, and you let the absurdity wrap round you like the softest blanket. The magistrate, surprisingly, joins in the fun. He admits, with a sheepish grin, that the goat's trial was perhaps the most memorable case he'll ever preside over and certainly the most amusing. He raises a mug of spiced cider to the goat's memory, prompting a sleepy cheer from the gathered villagers. Even the priest, no longer able to resist the charm of the tale, blesses the goat's spirit in a drowsy, half-hearted sermon that meanders into a story about his own childhood fear of particularly aggressive geese. And in these moments, the village feels like the sleepiest, coziest place on earth. A world where justice isn't about punishment, but about soothing old fears, poking gentle fun at themselves, and finding comfort in shared stories. No matter how silly, the scholar, still lingering in town, scribbles furiously in his notebook, trying to capture every evolving detail of the goat's ever-growing legend. You smile, knowing that no matter how much he writes, he'll never quite capture the warmth, the softness, the dreamy fog that makes the goat's tale such a perfect bedtime story. And as the night deepens, you let the storyteller's voice lull you once more, the familiar cadence of the goat's tail wrapping round you like the softest wool, the gentle bleat of the goat blending into the crackle of the hearth, into the hush of a village that has learned to sleep soundly under the watchful eye of a sleepy, four-legged legend. Winter blankets the village like a sleepy sigh, and you find the goat's tail evolving yet again, shaped by the snowflakes drifting lazily from the grey skies. The villagers huddle in their thatched cottages, gather round fires, sharing the familiar story with ever sleepier embellishments. Now, the goat has become a winter spirit. They say, its gentle bleat guiding lost travelers home through the fog. You chuckle as you overhear the blacksmith tell a traveler that if you leave a bowl of porridge by your door on the coldest night of the year, the goat's spirit will nibble just enough to leave behind good dreams. You suspect the blacksmith's own goats are the real beneficiaries of this tradition, but the villagers cling to it nonetheless, delighting in the cozy superstition. Historians still argue whether such traditions were rooted in real fears of the wild, or if they were simply ways for communities to spin their anxieties into softer, cuddlier tales. You suspect, as always, that it's both. Humans have a way of wrapping their deepest fears in wool and whiskers, giving them names and stories that make them feel manageable. Even the priest has given in fully to the sleepy charm of the goat, allowing a woodman goat carving to sit, quite unapologetically, beside the nativity scene. When questioned, he simply shrugs and mutters something about divine mysteries coming in many forms, even four-legged, bleating ones. In the square, the children now act out a winter pageant titled *The Goat Who Saved Christmas*. The plot, loosely inspired by the trial, tells the tale of a misunderstood goat who defends the village from a particularly grumpy snowstorm by convincing the sun to shine just a little longer. It makes no sense, of course, but the villagers adore it. The applause is sleepy, the cheers soft, but the warmth it spreads lingers like an extra quilt on a frosty night. You sit near the fire pit, letting the glow paint sleepy patterns on your face, listening as the villagers exchange their favorite versions of the goat's fate. Some now claim the goat was a king in disguise, testing the villagers' hearts. Others swear the goat was a messenger from the moon, sent to teach them the value of patience. You love how the tale grows fuzzier with each retelling, the edges blurring into a sleepy fog where facts and fancy stroll hand in hand. It no longer matters what the goat did or if the trial even happened exactly as told. What matters is the comfort the story brings, the way it knits the village together under its sleepy banner of cozy absurdity. You visit the library again, or rather, the scribe's cluttered room of scrolls, and find him composing a new ballad about the goat. This one tells of the goat's afterlife as a dreamy spirit, floating through the clouds, putting misbehaving angels on trial for playing their harps out of tune. You grin, picturing the goat lounging on a celestial bench, delivering sleepy verdicts to cherubs with crooked halos. The scribe tells you, between yawns, that he plans to submit the ballad to the bishop. You raise an eyebrow. The scribe shrugs. Why not? Even bishops need bedtime stories. That night, as the villagers gather for the winter goat vigil, a new event they invented only last week, you watch them light candles in the square, their faces soft in the flickering glow. They sing gentle songs about the goat's wisdom, about how even the smallest creature can change the course of sleepy justice. You lean back against a barrel, letting the voices drift over you like snowfall, letting the warmth of the crowd seep into your bones. You realize the goat has done what no magistrate, no bishop, no law ever could. It's brought the village together, taught them to laugh at their fears, to turn their worries into stories so soft and silly they might just slip unnoticed into dreams. And as the vigil winds down, the last candle flickering in the chapel window, you feel the goat's tail nestling deeper into the villagers' hearts, and yours too. It's become more than a legend now. It's a lullaby, a whispered prayer, a sleepy blanket they wrap themselves in when the world outside feels too dark, too loud, too unpredictable. And as the stars stretch across the sky, you hear it again, that faint, gentle bleat, curling through the night like a soft yawn. Whether it's real or just your imagination, you don't care. You let it rock you into a deeper sleep, knowing that in this village, justice is always a little absurd, always a little sleepy, and always exactly what you need to drift off into the gentlest of dreams. The snows melt, as they always do, into the sleepy trickle of spring, and with them, the goat's tail stretches into yet another season, blooming like the stubborn wildflowers that pepper the hills beyond the village. You stroll through those hills now, their soft greens dotted with goats, none of which seem particularly aware or particularly concerned that one of their kin has become the village's most beloved liege. And down in the square, the villagers prepare for the spring cleansing, a ritual once rooted in practical chores, but now thoroughly overtaken by the sleepy pageantry of the goat's story. They sweep the streets, tidy the chapel, and most importantly stage an elaborate mock trial where the goats of the village are judged for crimes like stealing hats, chewing laundry, and, of course, dreaming too loudly. You lounge under a tree, watching as the children don miniature wigs and robes, issuing absurd verdicts while their goat defendants munch grass with perfect disinterest. The villagers cheer, laugh, and, between gulps of honey wine, declare the goats innocent, guilty, or, on one occasion, worthy of being named mayor for the day. Historians, should they wander through this sleepy scene, would no doubt debate whether such rituals are meant to cleanse the town of old fears or simply to give them yet another excuse to celebrate th. Absurd, you know better. You know these rituals aren't about goats at all. They're about comfort, about taking the messy, frightening world and softening it into something the villagers can sip like warm milk at bedtime. You visit the chapel where the priest now keeps a tiny wooden goat on the altar, right beside the candles and the bread. When questioned by a curious traveler, he smiles sleepily and says, "It reminds us that even the smallest creatures deserve to be heard, and sometimes forgiven." The traveler, bemused, scribbles the quote into his journal, already plotting how to retell the tale in his own village. You grin, knowing that the goat's story will drift beyond these sleepy streets, carried by wandering feet and weary hearts eager for a bedtime story of their own. The town scribe, ever diligent in his sleepy way, has begun composing what he calls the Great Book of Goat Trials *, a compilation of not just the village's tale but also the countless animal trials whispered about. Across Europe, he reads snippets to the villagers by the hearth, detailing cases of sparrows on trial in Spain, frogs accused of singing blasphemous songs in Italy, and beetles sentenced to exile in Austria. You lean back, letting the sleepy parade of absurdities lull you into a dreamy haze, smiling as the villagers sigh, giggle, and shake their heads in gentle disbelief at the peculiarities of human justice. The storyteller, never one to let a tale rest too long, weaves the goat saga into a new story cycle, *. The goat's quest for the sleepiest kingdom, *. In this tale, the goat sails to lands where trials are conducted entirely by napping judges, where lawyers argue in lullabies, and where every verdict ends in a feast and a nap under the stars. The children listen, eyes drooping, already halfway to slumber before the tale even reaches its dreamy conclusion. You can't help but feel the same tug of sleep pulling at you, the story wrapping round you like the softest blanket. It's cozy nonsense, as soothing as the hush of spring rain on a chapel roof. One night, by the dying embers of the village's spring bonfire, you overhear the elders muse about how the goat's story will outlive them all, becoming, in time, a tale told by villagers who will never quite know where truth ends and cozy exaggeration begins. They chuckle at the thought, lifting their mugs in a sleepy toast to the goat, to justice, to absurdity, and to the comforts of not knowing everything. And you let their laughter, their songs, and the soft bleating of goats in the distance rock you deeper into the village's dreamy current, knowing that here, at least, justice will always be gentle, sleepy, and served best by candlelight and cider. You stretch beneath the stars, listening to the soft hush of the world settling into its sleepy rhythm, and whisper your own sleepy verdict into the night, guilty of being exactly the story I needed. And somewhere, perhaps in the rustle of the grass, perhaps only in your own mind, you hear that soft, familiar bleat, as if the goat agrees. Spring slips lazily into summer, the days stretching like a yawn, and the goat's tail soft, well-worn, endlessly reimagined, continues to lull the village into its cozy rhythms. You stroll through the sleepy streets, where merchants now hang faded banners depicting the goat's trial, their once bold colors dulled by sun and time. They flap gently in the breeze, whispering sleepy verdicts to no one in particular. The village has fully embraced the goat as its unofficial patron of justice, dreams, and long naps. The magistrate now keeps a carved goat atop his desk, a gentle reminder, he claims, to never take the law too seriously, or himself, for that matter. You smile as you watch him deliver his rulings with a theatrical yawn, the villagers chuckling softly at the sleepy charade. Even travelers now know the village as the town of the goat, stopping by not for its markets or its wine, but to hear the sleepy legend spun by the fireside, to watch the children's bleating reenactments in the square, and to buy goat-shaped trinkets that, they're told, ward off bad dreams and overzealous tax collectors. You overhear the blacksmith explaining to a wide-eyed merchant that the goat's spirit keeps the town safe from plague, drought, and, most importantly, boredom. The merchant buys to charms, just in case. You chuckle into your cider, letting the warmth of the story blanket you once more. Historians still argue whether the villagers' fixation on the goat reflects a deeper need for control, for a community, or simply for a good laugh in dark times. You lean back in your chair, letting the lazy buzz of summer lull you into your own soft conclusion. It doesn't matter. The story has done what all good tales do. It has become bigger than its origins, softer than its verdict, and cozier than any lore ever written. At the edge of the square, the storyteller gathers the villagers for what is now a nightly ritual, the telling of the goat's tale. Each night a new version emerges, the goat as king, as trickster, as sleepy defender of dreams. No one corrects the details. No one cares if the facts are blurred like old ink on parchment. The comfort is in the telling, in the soft cadence of familiar absurdity, in the way the tale wraps them up and rocks them gently into the arms of sleep. Even the priest has given up his protests, now ending his services with a sleepy nod to the goat, blessing the villagers' dreams with what he calls a touch of woolly wisdom. You grin as the villagers giggle through his sermons, their minds already drifting to the goat's softer, sillier gospel. The scholar, still lingering in the village longer than he planned, scribbles furiously in his journal, capturing every new detail, every sleepy addition to the goat's endless legend. You lean over his shoulder and see that even his notes have taken on the drowsy, meandering tone of the villagers' tales. The goat, it seems, has lulled him too. As summer nights stretch lazily into amber twilight, you find yourself once more at the town's edge, staring up at the old gallows hill where they say the goat's spirit still watches over the village. You sit quietly, letting the warm breeze brush your face, listening to the soft bleats of distant goats mingling with the sleepy hum of the town settling into its favorite story once again. You know now that the goat's trial was never truly about justice or law. It was about comfort, about giving shape to fear, about turning the sharp edges of the unknown into something you can laugh at, sing about, and carry with you into the softest parts of night. And as the stars blink lazily overhead, you let yourself drift into that same dreamy space, where ghosts stand trial, juries fall asleep mid-verdict, and justice always ends in a feast and a nap under the gentle gaze of a goat who, in the end, only ever wanted to You sigh, stretching beneath the moonlight, and smile into the quiet. The villagers hum their lullabies, the goats bleat softly in the fields, and the world, for just this moment, feels as sleepy and safe as an old woolen blanket tucked tight around your shoulders. And now, as the sleepy tale of the goat drifts into its softest, coziest corner, you let yourself sink even deeper into the warmth of its gentle absurdity. The sounds of the village fade into a dreamy hush, the low, distant chatter of villagers finishing their cider, the tender creak of shutters drawn closed, the soft rustling of goats settling into their pens, their breath rising like little clouds against the night air. You feel the rhythm of the town pulsing like a quiet lullaby, each heartbeat wrapped in the comfort of a story told, retold, and lovingly embroidered with every sleepy exaggeration the villagers can conjure. The goat is no longer just a story. It's the sleepy hush that rocks the village into dreamland, the soft bleat that fills the space between waking and sleep. And you, nestled here among them, let yourself drift fully into that hazy space where dreams feel as real as the sleepy village itself. You breathe in the scent of wood smoke, of old parchment, of sweet summer grass. You feel the softness of the goat's tail curl around you like a gentle fog, blurring the lines between day and night, fact and fable, waking and slumber. Your limbs grow heavier, your breath slower, your thoughts softer, as the world slips into stillness. The goat's story hums like a lullaby in the back of your mind, its gentle absurdity whispering you deeper into sleep's embrace. And as your eyes close, you smile, knowing that here, at least, justice will always be served with a chuckle, a blanket, and a softly spoken bleat. End of script. Sweet dreams.